Until further notice, best conference in college football. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for our SEC live show that we do each and every Tuesday at noon Eastern Time. Please settle in for the next couple hours. Enjoy some SEC football talk with us right here at the Voice of College Football. If you enjoy what we do, please hit the like button. Even if you don't enjoy what we do, but you enjoy the discussion, the debate, the analysis here, even if you don't agree with me, please hit the like button to keep us going here at the Voice of College Football. We appreciate all of you. Leave those comments and questions there in the live chat. I have left the link to call the show. Please do so as well, as we are waiting also a number of media members to join the show as they do each and every Tuesday. All right. I'll get to what's on my mind. Things are fairly quiet right now across the SEC. We are getting to the portion of the recruiting season in which we are starting to get a few commits come in, but not many. We will get some, of course, after there are big visits in the latter part of May, beginning of June, and then the floodgates will open in terms of the 2024 recruiting class, but we can run down some of the recent commits here soon. Also, I was looking at win-loss totals across the board. We are in the midst of ranking the programs across college football. So each and every offseason for the last few off seasons here at the Voice of College Football, we have ranked the programs 1 through whatever. It's now 133. So 1 through 133, ranking all the programs in college football right now. 2023 program rankings. I'm just about done. As I have reviewed the last 3 or 4 years, I'm considering the coach in place, the resources, the tradition, the brand, the history, the recruiting, all of that taken into consideration to rank all the programs in college football for 2023. Not to confuse anyone, we will separate that series about 4 to 6 weeks into the future when we rank all-time programs. We're going to rank all the programs all time. And if you caught our Big Ten show last night, then you saw I posted the grid that I'm working on that has compilations of winning percentage, AP poll votes and points, conference championships, national championships, first round draft selections, total draft selections, award winners, Heisman Trophy winners, major bowl wins, total bowl wins, all of it to rank the programs all time. So we will do that in a couple months, but right now we are working on 2023 program rankings. So where do you think the SEC various programs should rank between 1 and 133? Give me a call on that one, because what we're going to do is I'm going to post my 1 through 133 rankings, and then we're going to give you a couple days to digest it. And then we're going to do a big call-in show, and you guys can debate me on where I have ranked and give me feedback on where I have ranked everyone in college football. All right. In the midst of doing that, I'm always keeping in mind how to project and envision these programs and their development and their growth in these particular teams from year to year. So from 22 to 23. Keep in mind that in 2022, we had 4 teams in the SEC who had significant improvement or showed significant decline from one year to the next, from 2021 to 22. And I am measuring that by 3 wins, at least 3 wins, improvement or decline. So from 2021 to 2022, we saw Texas A&M go from an 8-4 disappointment to a 5-7 debacle. We saw Vandy, under the radar, move from 2-10 to 5-7. They won all their non-conference games. They at least won 3 out of 4 of non-conference games. They played Wake. They lost that game. They won the other 3 non-conference games. That is a monumental feat for Vandy. And they won 2 late season conference games against the likes of Florida and Kentucky. So Vandy moved from 2-10 under Clark Lee to 5-7. Big improvement for the Commodores. We had a move by Tennessee, of course, even though we were most of us impressed with Josh Heupel's first season in Knoxville, finishing 7-5 regular season. They then made the big jump to near elite status in college football with 10 wins. So from 7-5 to 10-2 and a top 5 finish for Tennessee. And then the other dramatic move was LSU, of course. SEC Western Division champions with a regular season record of 9-3. Previous season 6-7, 6-6 in the regular season before the bowl loss to Kansas State. So Brian Kelly's arrival meant 3 more wins during the regular season for LSU and a division championship. So those were the 4 schools in the SEC last season that had a dramatic improvement or decline from 2021 to 2022. Who will those schools be this year? Do not expect, when you look at the standings from last season, do not expect all of them just to basically stay in the same placeholders. History has told us year after year after year after year that we will see significant improvement or decline from 3 to 4 teams in the SEC. It just will simply happen. That is the probability. It happens every season. All right, on to your comments and questions, and I've got another topic to tackle as well as we look at schedules for 2023. Howdy, Highlander. Ed Rogers asking, can Alabama compete at the same level with The Ohio State University and Georgia anymore? The answer is absolutely yes. Georgia seems to be on another level all by themselves at this point, but Alabama lost 2 games last year on the last play of the game. Alabama, much like Ohio State, needs to find a quarterback and show that they can move on from an all-time great, Bryce Young, a Heisman Trophy winner, and arguably the best quarterback in college football, onto their next guy. And they've got basically 2 guys in play that we have dissected a number of ways. Check out our Alabama videos on the Alabama channel and on the SEC channel, because we have certainly talked about Jalen Milroe and the competition at the Alabama quarterback position. The offensive line also went from, consider this, there was a lot of attention in 2020 when Alabama just rolled to the national championship. A lot of attention given to the Alabama offense and it being one of the all-time great offenses. Well, one of the reasons why the offensive line, it was a Joe Moore award-winning offensive line in 2020 that took a pretty significant downturn in 21 and then again in 22. So a return to form for Alabama football. And let's keep in mind that Alabama in a down year still had one of the 4 best teams in college football. But they lose their 2 best players, Bryce Young and Will Anderson, and a host of others. They lose despite the disappointing performance by their offensive line. They will have number 1 selections in the NFL draft along the offensive front. So they lose significant talent and depth along the offensive line. So it is an Alabama spring of uncertainty and work that needs to be accomplished. Again, most notably at quarterback and offensive line. The wide receiver core has been nothing close to what it's been in the past. The likes of Jerry Jeudy and Devontae Smith and Henry Ruggs, all those guys have not been replaced. So good question there. I still believe in Alabama. I still believe in Nick Saban. 2 new coordinators. They have certainly been able to deal with that situation in the past, but new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator in Tuscaloosa, and that always means an adjustment and always means that there is uncertainty there as well. So Kevin Steele is well respected and well known, but his recent performances have not been great. And Tommy Rees certainly never fielded a prolific offense with Notre Dame. Nick Saban liked what he saw out of Tommy Rees, and he made that move. Ed is asking if Alabama released the 5-star player that got busted for going 141 miles per hour and dealing drugs. I do not believe that they released him. No. We talked about that. Was it just last week or the week before? I'm losing track, but we certainly covered all of that ground at the time, and I haven't seen any further updates on that. Yes, it's simply a suspension at this point until they find out and go through the entire legal process. Joey's reminding everyone, please grab the link and share it out there on social media. We would appreciate that. Good to see you, Dan Beast Media as well. Big Georgia fan. All right. I also wanted to dive into, in addition to, if you're just joining us, we've talked over the first 15 minutes about possible stock market risers and decliners for this season in the SEC. The big ones last year were, of course, Texas A&M, Vandy, Tennessee, and there was one other one: Tennessee, Vandy, Texas A&M, and LSU last year. At least a 3-win increase or decrease from the season before. Also wanted to get into there's going to be a determination made and an announcement made very soon as to where this schedule for 2024 and beyond is headed for the SEC, and we will delve into that a little bit later. 8 games for a conference slate or 9 games. Nick Saban has been on the bandwagon for 9 conference games. You would think with adding 2 more teams to go to 16 teams in the league that you would have to go to 9 games, but there is still an argument for an 8-game conference season. All right. We're going to talk some Auburn football. We got Kyle Loomis on the line from E2C Network. Hey, Kyle.
Good to see you, Mark. Thanks again for inviting me, and happy to talk about some Auburn football. It's almost here. Saturday is A-Day game.
That's right. And so I'm glad that you showed up for that very reason. Always glad that you show up for these conversations. So, Kyle, exactly that. We only had one spring game this past weekend. We've got a glut of games coming up, but the most notable one is Auburn. And I believe that you can watch that game if you have the SEC Network Plus, which you can get online.
Yeah, I believe that's true. And that may be the best way to watch this thing, because let me just tell you, folks, you better be committed to coming to watch this A-Day game, because it is supposed to downpour the entire time. Yeah, and it's a bit of a disappointment, because obviously there's this somewhat of a renewed excitement of Hugh Freeze being here and something new, something fresh, something to get excited about. He's also confirmed that they're planning on trying this new scoring format. I won't call it a new for like college football, but just new for Auburn fans. And there's plenty of other things going around. They usually make a big weekend out of it in Auburn, do other things. There's a Frank Thomas statue going up, who did play Auburn football. People didn't know that. The famous baseball player once played tight end for Auburn football. A lot of that going on. So my advice to you is this: if you can get to Auburn, get there and come be a part of it, it's going to be a lot of fun. But I don't blame people that may want to take advantage of that SEC Network Plus option and watch it from the comfort and dryness of their homes.
So I think I'm safe on being able to watch the game. I looked into this the other day because I just wanted to make sure. So I've got ESPN, I've got cable. Now it's not going to be on your cable system, but you can just jump online and you've got the extension in terms of your cable package online. And I should be able to just, yes, from the comfort of my home, I'm going to take in the Auburn A-Day game. Is there any talk about, sometimes in these weather situations, they have it pinpointed pretty well that, okay, the weather's going to hit at roughly noon. So why don't we move it to 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon or vice versa. It's going to hit later in the
Right.
afternoon. So why don't we, you know, move it earlier in the day to let everyone get here, enjoy the game, and be able to clear campus.
I'm sure there are, people that make those decisions that have already started planning those things out. The problem is, as I've already addressed, the so much going on with the Frank Thomas statue unveiling. There's not a lot of wiggle room that day to move things around without them kind of, getting on top of each other. There's a baseball game schedule that's already been adjusted. So it's going to get challenging. Obviously, they know most people are coming for this game. So, that's going to take priority. I could see them maybe potentially moving it up or back an hour or something like that if it really was that bad and he thought it was going to be affected. But I'm not privy to anything being changed at this point. If it wasn't for the busyness of the rest of the day and the weekend, you might see something like that, in my opinion.
So my enjoyment of the Auburn spring game is going to be up to the individuals who present it, because this is how I look at these spring games. I don't know that we can gather a whole lot from the actual action on the field.
Right.
That always has to be taken into context. Okay, the offensive line just opened this enormous hole and this running back just shot out for 40 yards. Okay, well, is
It's
that
fun.
because the offensive line's really good or the defensive line's,
Right.
and then just obviously the intensity level can only be to a certain level. The complexity of the schemes, if anything, you know, I, it hit me the other day that there may be less validity to these scrimmages that get televised than the ones that don't, because the coaches, when no one's around, will of course employ the more exotic schemes, and they want to keep it straight vanilla for the fans, not the fans, but for everybody else, opponents, rivals that can watch the game. So from that standpoint, there's something, you know, taken away from the competition.
Yeah, you brought it right there, the nail on the head. This is kind of the conundrum of spring games. First of all, from the fans' perspective, yes, we just saw a humongous hole opened up and we just went on a 50-yard touchdown run. Great, but then well, that was our defense that we did that on. So you don't really know what to make of that as a fan. So there's always that kind of element. I'll get to something else with that Coach Hugh Freeze brought up in his press conference yesterday. But I would also say that Hugh Freeze did mention he wants to temper expectations for the Auburn fans, stressing that it's going to be somewhat vanilla in the sense that we don't want to show our cards. We're going to be televised. And outside of that, there's going to be people that are closely watching in the stands. I'm not saying that there's spies out there in the stands or anything like that, but you would be an idiot if you weren't sending someone out there just to get an opinion of what the team looks like if you are an SEC opponent or something like that. It's open to everybody. Everybody can get in. But regardless of all that, obviously it can get a little bit monotonous at times outside of maybe like a really big, strong quarterback battle, which Auburn kind of has, but it doesn't feel as exciting as the last couple of years. The interesting thing for me, though, that I really like that Coach Hugh Freeze talked about yesterday was this concept of actually playing a legitimate game for the spring game. And he's not talking about Auburn versus Alabama, Auburn versus Georgia in the spring game, because obviously that's not going to happen. It's just not how the world works. But he was advocating, and apparently he did this during his time at Ole Miss, for just a game with a Troy. If people don't know who Troy is, it's a little school south of Auburn. Sometimes it has a big win every once in a while. I think they did pretty good this past year. But if that's not familiar enough for you, let's throw out a UAB or something like that. Most people know UAB out of Birmingham. Auburn versus UAB in a spring game. That way, it just kind of does a couple things here. It provides more interest for the fans because it's an actual opponent you're playing against, somebody with the obviously idea that Auburn's probably going to win that 9 times out of 10. It limits your chances of injuries in your spring game by about 50% because you're not using everybody, even though you would like to get some reps. And that's theoretical, but just in concept alone. So those two things right there are good enough reasons to try it, in my opinion. But what I loved for his suggestion was, let's get a charity to take this on, and we can raise money for this charity. All the proceeds, or a certain amount, goes toward that, and make it a big state by state thing. And obviously an Alabama thing, you rotate every few years. Auburn does UAB, then South Alabama, then Troy, then whoever else wants to get in the mix. Jacksonville State. course, we know the Crimson Tide will never do that. They hardly ever play anybody out of the state outside of Auburn because they're scared. We can go into that some other time if you'd like. But that was the concept that he presented yesterday in his press conference that he would like to advocate for, but he feels like, this was his quote, that he's the only one interested in that right now. So it seems like a pipe dream, but I love that concept.
I like it too from the entertainment standpoint and just the intrigue of watching an actual game and watching a different opponent and not watching a team,
Beat up on
take on itself, of course, for the very reason that we just outlined, a 50-yard touchdown run. And how do you really look at that versus, okay, the 50-yard touchdown run came against a pretty decent UAB team. And therefore we can more evaluate what's going on. I would be concerned with, well, yes, you would think that the injury factor would be limited and theoretically cut in half because you have half the players playing at any one time for every play. You would also think that the intensity level would be increased. Now, some football coaches would tell you that in some ways decreases the propensity for injuries. It wouldn't seem like it would, but then it could be argued that the intensity of the game could cause some injuries. Other than that, there is a potential embarrassment factor of losing that. If Auburn comes away with a win, nobody bats an eye, regardless of what the score is. Nobody's concerned. Nobody raises an eyebrow. But if they lose that, even though it doesn't count, it doesn't matter. There's going to be all sorts of feedback given to the Auburn football.
Well,
property.
and that's no different than the feedback you get from the spring game. We've got people who, they say they played a little ball and they can see and make these hardcore analysis of a spring game. When the coach already has primed you and prepped you, you're not going to see a whole lot in this. Don't make strong. I forget what his exact quote was, but essentially it was, you're not going to see a lot of substance in this. So don't walk away with strong opinions about this. And I love the candidness that Coach Hugh Freeze is approaching that with. I think he's doing that just in general about a spring game, but because of where Auburn football's roster is at right now. According to him, outside of one or two key injuries, we're pretty healthy, and he's able to do this new format of where you give the defense a certain amount of points and then let the offense try to catch up to them throughout the game. So it makes it a little bit more interesting as opposed to this, you score or you pick up a fumble, you get 2 points or something like that. Nobody can follow that. It gets all types of confusing. I do like the fresh takes that Hugh Freeze is bringing to the table in terms of just trying to make some interest about this spring game right now. So I hate that this weather may play a factor in that, because I think it could have been a really exciting and will be an exciting A-Day to some respect, depending on how excited you actually get about a spring game.
And Kyle, the reason I said that the people that might be most responsible for my interest and my takeaway from this game are the broadcasters and the production team is that at one point, these games used to be, and I put games in quotes, these games used to be broadcast like they were football games.
Right.
And you quickly determine, okay, it's not that critical that they convert this 4th and 3 play. This is not, Auburn LSU in the middle of November. So the TV networks have caught on to this at some point, and I think they've generally done an outstanding job of presenting this more as, this is a preview of the 23 season. This is our look at the team. We're going to talk to various people. We're going to catch the coach. We're going to catch the coordinators. We're going to talk to various people around the football program. We're going to talk about position battles. We're going to talk about, transitions and during the off season and additions to the coaching staff. We're going to present a TV show about the football program. And I think that that's the way to go. And that's where I've gained the most from these spring games the last few years.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that. I think you obviously need to figure out what's the best way to present this, because if you present it as this thing is important and then you realize you didn't pick up that third down, like you said, and nobody's really super disappointed about it, well, it doesn't really play well on TV. So yeah, I think it's all about how you present it. And if that's the way that they've been transitioning and have transitioned, I think that's a smart move on their part. I think honestly too, the excitement really is only towards the fan base that this team is actually about. You're not going to have, let's just say, Auburn and LSU fans tuning in to this game all at the same time, focused in on all their interest on this particular. It's just going to be the Auburn fan base, and we are very wide and far-reaching, almost to some people's annoyance at times with how much we yell War Eagle at each other and stuff. But yeah, you're playing to an Auburn audience, so you got to kind of shift the ways you present it with that as well. So a preview is a good way to look at it.
Kyle Loomis, E2C Network, right here on YouTube. And again, folks, what you're going to find there is not just Auburn football content, but the entire athletics community there at Auburn and the entire academic and social community there at Auburn, represented in everything involving the Auburn family. Kyle, is there anything else that you wanted to hit on today?
Yeah, I got some notes from the press conference I could just give you a little bit.
Absolutely.
Just to talk about a few of the points maybe to look for. Obviously, everyone shifts their mind to the quarterback battle. Nothing really super definitive there other than Robbie Ashford has been dealing with a little bit of injury, but has since kind of gotten a little bit almost full speed is what he said there. It's been very hit or miss with the quarterbacks the entire spring, as you might expect. 1 week it's TJ Finley's doing good. The next week it's Holden Gerner. Who was effectively the third string, is doing better. It would be interesting to see if Robbie had been healthy this entire spring, how that might have changed things. So that will be obviously a point of interest for most fans there. What stuck out to me yesterday when he was asked about the tight ends, this is just my interpretation of it, he really kind of lit up about that. And that's odd because if you remember from previous conversations, we lost arguably one of the best tight ends we've had in our history, just in terms of length of time he's been there and what he's accomplished during that time. John Samuel Shanker, he's gone. But there's a room here that is full of guys that have been playing behind him that are very tenured. Experienced, you can kind of debate on because John Samuel Shanker took up most of that time there, but they were experienced in terms of being in on plays, being blockers, and getting some balls thrown to them as well. There's also Rivaldo Fairweather, who is a transfer brought in from FIU this year. And it feels like every press conference he's either asked about or brought up by the coaches. And so that really excites me. And you would think that all the attention would be on quarterbacks, that it would be on running backs with the departure of Tank Bigsby. And I will add this too, since I brought that up. Coach Hugh Freeze said yesterday that he believes Jarquez Hunter is the best running back he has ever coached. Now, let me give you one caveat. And he said this himself, that he hasn't had a lot of, he said, great ones. And he said he's had a lot of good running backs, but big names that he's coached. But still, the fact that he just stepped right out there and says Jarquez Hunter is the best running back he's ever coached. Those were the two big things. The way he talked about the tight end room and the way he was very complimentary of Jarquez, which shouldn't surprise Auburn fans, but it was interesting to hear that phrase put with that running back.
All right, that's going to have me scurrying to Ole Miss's 2013, 14, 15 rosters in that range. He produced a couple really good top 10, top 15 teams in the country, but names are not coming to mind right
Jordan Wilkins. Jordan Wilkins is one.
Yes, there's one. I was going to say, as soon as I see the roster, I'll be like, oh, yeah. And that's one name right there. Yes. He was a really good one. Yeah.
So he doesn't have a long history of, again, he was very careful to say not great running backs, not saying they weren't good, but just that's not what he's been known for. Maybe been more known for his quarterback, some of his bigger wide receivers, Laquan Treadwell, you throw out there, Evan Ingram, things like that, which should excite Auburn fans because that's one area that we've been lacking in terms of production. We've had good wide receivers. If you followed Auburn's pro day, you saw how talented Shedrick Jackson was and that how skilled, athletic he is. Maybe just wasn't utilized properly over the last 4 or 5 years that he's been here. Feels like it's been longer than that. So you can look at that a couple different ways. This guy said the best running back he's ever seen, but he hasn't had a lot of great running backs. Or you can choose to say, well, this is a coach that recognizes what he has. And we've seen, there was a moment last year, not a very, in my opinion, educated moment, but where the Auburn fandom as a collective was starting to ask the question, was Tank Bigsby should he be the second string running back to Jarquez Hunter? There are some other things that played into that, and obviously that didn't really get any legs behind it, but That's how talented this guy is. So I think he will be Auburn's bread and butter this year, getting established and then letting that passing game, that quarterback game catch itself back up. So be excited, Auburn fans, because your coach is really excited about his running back.
Kyle, thanks you so much for stopping by. Saturday's a big day on campus. I'm sure that you and everyone there at E2C Network are going to be all over it. So this is a great time to get familiar, folks. So head on over to E2C Network right here on YouTube and check out Kyle and the rest of the staff there.
Yeah, it's going to be a busy weekend. I'm probably not going to have any sleep. So yeah, stay tuned there and plenty to follow us along over at E2C Network. So again, thank you, Mark, for having me.
Great to see you, Kyle. Have a great weekend.
You too. War Eagle.
All right, we will keep it moving right here at the Voice of College Football and talk more SEC Western Division. Look at this. We got Ty Hudson on the line. Tusk Talk with Ty. There he is. What's going on?
In the building, in the flesh. How are you, Mark?
Good to see you.
You too, man. Hope all's well.
Absolutely. Everything's good. And of course, let's see, we're just over a week away from seeing the Hogs on the field for the Arkansas spring game. That's April 15th.
Yeah.
And we get to see Dan Enos' offense at work, at least to a certain extent. Of course, as we always have to preface these conversations with, it's a spring game. It's vanilla. You know, take it for what it is. Just enjoy the guys getting out there and throwing the football around. So the Dan Enos offense, if we heard anything in the last few weeks that has given us any indication as to how this could be a little bit different.
Yeah, actually. I mean, aside from personnel, right? Going to have some new looks on the offensive line and the wide receivers. But in terms of just the offense itself, Razorback fans are going to see something they haven't seen in a little bit, which is a quarterback underneath the center. Kendall, I mean, unless it was a goal line situation or a 3rd and short situation, didn't see that very often at Arkansas in his time here in his 3 years. So you are going to have you're going to have KJ under the center a little more. And of course, like I already mentioned, some personnel changes. Malik Hornsby's gone. Jacoby Criswell's in, North Carolina transfer. But as far as just the offense itself, you're going to see a little bit of pistol offense, something he's kind of always carried around with him. As far anything beyond that, it's we don't know, right? Because they're only going to show us just this much in practice, which I think I've been to every single practice. I don't think I've missed one. Now they did have a scrimmage Saturday that was closed off. I've been trying to dig for any kind of information, and either nobody's just willing to mention anything or they just don't know, which my guess is probably the second part there. They don't know. And then they had a scrimmage a Thursday, maybe 2 weeks before that. And again, we don't, we know that there were some guys that got a little dinged up out of that, but we don't really know like what the offense, we don't have an idea of what they really ran, on the field.
Ty Hudson's here talking up the Hogs. Catch Ty on his YouTube channel right there, Tusk Talk with Ty. And Ty, we want to make sure that everybody's got the best way to find you and when the show times are. And unless you've nailed something down here in recent weeks, it's much like me. It's whenever you decide to go live.
Yeah, that's it. I try to stick to a Monday, Friday routine. Uploading some shorts from what footage I get in practice in between that. But yeah, it's really going to be random, and then I do stuff for Patreon supporters, shout out to my Patreon peeps. I think there might be a couple maybe coming in here in a little bit. I try to do some like behind the scenes stuff with them, give them some access to interviews. Trying to work with guys like Otis Kirk. I'm trying to get him back on. He's got a busy schedule, but it's random. It's that's just the playbook these days, especially in the off season.
Absolutely. I'm right there with you. I just can't nail it down. I've got too many commitments, too many things going on, but always enjoy the conversation with Ty. So you have, what is the situation out at practice in regards to your availability, your accessibility, and what you're able to get out there?
Yeah. So in the beginning of spring camp, they gave us, like the first 8 periods, which is tantamount to almost the whole practice. That's like 80% of practice. And they let us film quite a bit. So I tried to get as much footage of the prospect from your neck of the woods, actually, Tesla, this 3-star, 6'3", 6'4", 215-pound wide receiver. Tried to get as much footage of him, but yeah, and now it started to shrink a little bit, and it's usually Tuesdays and Thursdays. We had Pro Day, which was my very first Pro Day. I've never been to one before. That was actually really fun. Got to watch Drew Sanders just put on a show for people. I'm so ready to see if he gets drafted in the first round. I think someone's going to get a steal if they pick him up in the second round or even in the tail end of the first round, which I think a lot of projections have him going to. But yeah, I mean, it's reminiscent of regular season, except it's just that 2 days a week, and the amount of video is starting to close up. You're, instead of periods 1 through 6 where you could film, now it's like periods 1 through 4. And if you're lucky, you could stay the rest of practice. But yeah, I've really been staying close to Dan Enos, to the quarterbacks. Tried to keep an eye on what's going on with the wide receivers. And just this last week, I got some footage of Luke Haas, the 4-star freshman out of Bixby, Oklahoma. Everyone's going crazy about. They're all the way on the south end of the field. You've got to walk all the way down there, and I'm, huffing and puffing my fat butt up there to get some footage and watch him practice and watch the tight ends practice. But yeah, it's very similar for me, to last fall camp and regular season. That'll change. I don't know what the access is going to look like for the red-white scrimmage, but that doesn't really matter because that's going to be televised. I almost would rather be at home for that. But I've only missed maybe 3 scrimmages in the last 20 years. So I'd like to go, and I plan on going. So
good stuff. We've got Ty Hudson here from Tusk Talk with Ty. And he's all over Arkansas athletics. Of course, the basketball team just made its run. The baseball team is on the field, I'm sure. I don't know what the status is right there, but they usually are nationally competitive.
Yeah.
And of course, we talk football.
They just beat Alabama in a pretty tough series this weekend in Fayetteville. But yeah, it's full go right now. This is like because we know what's coming after this, right? After spring camp, then you go right into the transfer portal. And then in June, for Arkansas fans, that's when the recruiting is going to really pick up. And in June, it's going to be I was just talking to one of my sponsors today, actually, in a text message, talking to him about the month of June and how crazy it's going to get, because that's when Sam Pittman that's when the large majority of those high school recruits, you're going to get a lot of them visiting, and you're going to get a lot of them committing in the month of June. So it's going to be busy. July is that month that's just brutal.
Well, yeah, I made that statement probably 20 minutes before you jumped on, that latter part of May, beginning of June, big recruiting weekends. And then a lot of guys, hey, they step off of campus and they've made up their mind. They've thought, okay, yeah, I've seen enough. Boom. Yeah. And they make a decision. Others are going to, you're going to see with some of these top recruits where they've got a recruiting weekend, boom, the first weekend of June here, then they're going here, then they're going here, then they're going here. And within 3 to 4 weeks after that, boom, there's a flood of commits across college football.
Yeah.
There are very few programs, a couple elite programs, that it's basically just the expectation is gun for a national championship. That's what's out there. That's all we think about. That's the expectation every year. But they are, we can make a very short list. Then you've got those hopeless programs on the other end of the spectrum. And if we just narrow this down to the SEC, you've got a lot of mid-tier programs. We'll put Arkansas in there with Ole Miss and others, where it's like, okay, is this going to be an up year, or this going to be kind of a sideways year? And is this, are we trending forward to 2024, or is the fan base thinking, hey, this could be our chance to do something special, or this is kind of just a year in which we want to improve and look decent, but really 2024 is going to be the big year. where do you think Arkansas is in regards to what the expectations are and what they should be?
Well, year 4 for Sam Pittman. I mean, based on what he did in putting a better product, despite the win totals in 2020, listen, that team could have, and I know we don't like doing the woulda, coulda, shoulda. That team was good enough to win 5 games in a 10-game schedule in 2020. Got robbed of the Auburn game. Speaking of the Auburn people in chat, I saw some of them were wanting me to compare Arkansas and Auburn, but that game was kind of robbed from them, but that's okay. I'll give them 3 wins. And then you fast forward to 2022 and they just surpass. It was incredible. I mean, what they were able to do year 2 so quickly under Sam Pittman. And of course, so much of that has to do with the transfer portal and just guys stepping up that are natural, the recruits, guys that were actually recruited by Arkansas straight out of high school. You had some guys really step up that year. Last year was a little bit of a step back. 6-6 is not where Hog fans thought a lot of people, including myself, I thought that team was good enough to maybe win 8. Maybe the ceiling being 9, and they came up short. They ended up with just six wins, but they did win their bowl game, knocking out Kansas. Did the same thing to them in the NCAA tournament. I got to tell you, that's kind of fun to end Kansas postseason run back-to-back sports. That's entertaining, but I think the expectations, it's a tricky question because of, you mentioned all the changes. You've got 2 new coordinators on both sides of the ball, offense and defense. You got a new tight end coach. I like some of the moves in the secondary with what they've done in terms of who they've hired. I like what they've done so far in the transfer portal. Actually, I really like what they've done in the transfer portal. They've got some good-looking pieces coming in out of this recruiting class. Luke Haas, who I just mentioned a minute ago, I fully expect him to be a part of this offense, and along with Shamar Easter, who's not on the field yet, who's not there in spring camp yet, but he'll be here. I think he checks in the summer, and he'll be available in fall camp. You've got Ty Washington, who's a redshirt freshman tight end also. You look at the transfer pieces. I've already mentioned Slaw, and they've got a couple others that I'm curious about. It's tough to put a finger on it. I feel like the expectations probably should be, realistically speaking, around 8 to 9. Do I think they could go above that? Maybe. We'll have to wait and see. And by the way, the spring camp, I kind of agreed with what your guy said on that was on here just a minute ago, the Auburn guy. He's right. It's hard to look at a spring practice or spring scrimmage and take a whole lot away from that. But also having saying that, I have been there. I've been at practice. I've watched these guys. Someone like Centennia, redshirt freshman out of my high school, actually at Fayetteville High. He's looked really good throughout spring camp. He's looked pretty good. I'm surprised more people aren't writing about him. He seems to always be around the ball. He's catching. I don't see him dropping many balls. He's running over the middle. They're lining him up at the slot position. He looks really quick. We know he's a track guy out of high school. It's part of the reason why he wasn't. It was actually the reason why he wasn't here last spring when he could have been, but he had track to deal with. There's so many moving parts here. I think somewhere between 8 and 9 wins should probably be. I think should be the expectations. Again, you're talking about year 4. You're talking about KJ Jefferson, who's going to be a senior this year, a loaded backfield. Mark, my gosh, Dubinion, who has, I think, taken over probably RB2 over AJ Green, this guy who's flashed, maybe not consistently, but AJ Green is fantastic. Apparently in that scrimmage, the first scrimmage they had a couple of weeks ago on a Thursday, I think he reeled off like a 62-yard run or something crazy. But Dubinion, who was a freshman a year ago, slowly kind of took over RB2, and he looks just as quick in practice. Now, again, you got to take that with a grain of salt. Rocket Sanders, who I think is, I know Judkins is up there. There's some running backs in this conference, as there always is, but I think Rocket is legitimately one of the top 8, maybe higher ranked running backs in college coming back next year. KJ, again, who's going to be one of the top 3 quarterbacks. There are questions at tight end because of the youth outside of Nathan Bax. You've got questions of all these transfer wide receivers. Are they going to mesh? Matt Landers did a pretty good job of meshing, but that was also in a different offense. You got the departures on defense, no Drew Sanders, but you got a guy like Christopher Paul, who was outstanding, was a freshman All-American at linebacker. A lot of moving parts, a lot of new personnel, a lot of new coaches. I still think their ceiling is around 8 to maybe 9 wins. I mean, I think they're in really good shape next year. And Dan Enos in 2015 had a prolific offense with Brandon Allen at quarterback and a bunch of guys that, didn't make much of a career in the pros behind other than Henry and Alex Collins. So he's back, and now he gets to work with someone like a KJ Jefferson. I'm not knocking that 2015 personnel, by the way. Those were fantastic players at the college level, but they weren't loaded down with someone like with what they have in the backfield combined with what they have at quarterback and with the potential that they have at tight end. Now, Henry was a star. Henry absolutely was a star, but behind him, you didn't really have much. I think this tight end class could be huge year one, along with Nathan Bax, and I think they're going to go into the transfer portal and grab an older tight end. Still questions, but I think they're somewhere between 8 and 9 wins. That ought to be the expectation.
Is the 2024 quarterback being groomed and on the roster?
The freshman Singleton?
Do you think that the quarterback who should be starting and will be starting in 2024 is currently on the roster?
Yeah. Criswell.
Okay.
He's gotten better. And I was pretty hard on him the first 2 weeks because in spring camp, because I don't think he threw a very good ball. I mean, he looked, I don't want to say overwhelmed, but you could tell he was trying to soak it all in. I mean, you could just see it on their eyes. I'm no veteran. This is my first spring camp, but I went to damn near every fall camp and I went to a lot of practices during the season. And you could tell those guys were in the vibe of it. They were there. They had work to do. Some of the newcomers and, Tesla and Criswell, Singleton, who's a freshman, which is a little more understandable. You could just kind of see it in their eyes. They're kind of looking around at the indoor facilities like they're trying to just soak it all in. Not to say that North Carolina doesn't have those similar kind of facilities, but you know what I mean? They're just trying to take all the whole experience in. And now Criswell's settling in. I think he's QB number 2. I feel better this year if something were to happen to KJ, knock on wood, but we know what kind of runner he is. We know he's a physical guy with that big frame. You're going to need someone like Criswell, who's a little bit older and who I think who's got better arm talent than Malik Hornsby. And I think he may not have the wheels that Hornsby had, but I think he's a more settled in, developed version of what you want at QB2, especially with Dan Enos in this offense.
By the way, our buddy Kyle Loomis, who was just on talking about Auburn, says would be fun to discuss those controversial Auburn-Arkansas games.
Oh, come on. If you're talking about 2020, get out of here. I mean, Bo Nix, we know what happened. The Arkansas, what happened. Auburn, listen, Auburn is kind of all over the place the last few years, and they've definitely had Arkansas's number for a long time. There's no doubt. They've definitely, they've won a natty. They've far more proven than Arkansas is in football. But I think Arkansas, they're on kind of similar trajectories, ironically enough. But that game, 2020, you got to be kidding me. Like, that was – go Google that. Go YouTube that. You know what happened at the end of that. That certainly was one that
it's been over 2 years ago, so I would have to refresh my memory. But I do remember at the time, my conclusion was that Arkansas got ripped off. And I do remember Bo Nix threw the ball at the ground. What did he do? I'm trying to.
It was behind the line of scrimmage and behind him, and he spiked the ball, which is a fumble. And then I think their excuse was Joseph Fouché, I think, went for the ball, and I think they said that there wasn't a clear execution to the ball or something, and he clearly jumped for the ball and they recovered. I didn't take it as like, oh, well, the SEC's out to hate Arkansas. I think Auburn just was. And here's the other thing. It was 2020. I take that whole year with such a big grain of salt. I don't hold that game. There's a lot of Hog fans. Yeah. They get red in the face. Like, if they see me out in public somewhere putting gas on my car or whatever, oh, that damn Auburn game 2020. Oh, and I'm like, man, who cares? Like, it was a year that really didn't matter. I think
They would have gone 4-6.
Yeah, well, right.
Instead of 3
Fine,
and
take
7.
your fourth win, I guess. But what mattered to me in 2020 more was that we saw the product on the field look so much more established. It was a better product.
Yeah, they were the best 3-7 team you could imagine, and just so far removed from what we saw the 3 previous years under Chad Morris. Yes, they were just significantly improved. They were so competitive in almost all of their games. So then Auburn kicked a game-winning field goal right after that, correct?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, they did. They kicked the game-winning field goal.
Yeah.
All I remember about that, they had because what could have happened was Arkansas just take over and eat up the clock. If I remember that right. I don't think maybe Auburn had one timeout left. I've put that game so far in the back of my mind, and I really I get it. It is important. I definitely don't mind ribbing Auburn fans about it a little bit, but what mattered to me more than anything that year was that, again, like I mentioned, Arkansas was headed in the right direction. That's what mattered the most. And that game kind of proved it because Auburn was kicking Arkansas's rear in the first half. I think, they had almost 300 yards of offense in the first half or something. I mean, they were doing whatever they wanted in the first half. Then Arkansas fought back in the second half. It was honestly a good game. It really was. It was a good game. And Auburn and Arkansas, oftentimes, when Auburn isn't beating the crap out of Arkansas, they're usually really good games. Just like Arkansas and A&M. And A&M has beaten Arkansas 9 times out of 10 the last decade. So I think Arkansas fans are just tired of being like, yeah, it was a great game, but we still lost. They're tired of that. They're ready to move on into the winning category. And I think Sam's done a good job of building a sound foundation. If he could build on top of that, I'd love to see it. But I think whoever's the coach 4 or 5 years from now, I certainly think they're better served. They're better off than where they definitely were at the end of the Brett Bielema era and the of course the Chad Morris era. And that's what mattered to me the most in 2020. And a lot of people called me crazy. I think I picked them at 8-4 going into that year. I said, I think they're going to win 8. And people called me crazy. I said, no, I'm telling you, it was a better product on the field. It looked cohesive. Nobody looked lost like they did under Chad. They all knew what their job was. The execution on the field was so much better. You could see it. And for that, Hog fans have got to be so thankful for Sam Pittman. But of course, now it's about building. He's laid a good foundation despite maybe underperforming in 2022, but there's still a solid foundation. It's time to build on top of that. But these 2 hires on both sides of the ball, to make those kind of hires in the same year under the circumstances that Sam's under right now, well, that's tough. That's really tough. And you know what's going to happen if one side of the ball is really bad, then Sam Pittman's the worst coach ever, no matter what happens on the other side of the ball. So yeah, they're headed in the right direction, but we'll see if they can. We'll see what happens, especially with all the new hires and I don't want to say mass exodus, but maybe that's right when you look at how many players have left the program over the last couple of years. But to still be trending, I think, in a mostly positive direction, it's a good sign.
My one statement, as we bring it back to, as you've brought it back to 2023, which we should, but I've got one more comment about the past. I was just astounded that I didn't think that an SEC team outside of Vanderbilt could be as bad as Arkansas was. I just didn't think it was possible. You can be that bad in the league. Obviously, somebody's got to lose the games inside the SEC, but I don't know if people remember the list of teams that Arkansas lost to. Colorado State, what was it? Western Kentucky, North Texas.
Yep. And
some of these games weren't even close. I couldn't believe how bad that they suddenly became. I just was like, this isn't a mid-tier SEC program.
Yeah.
And they've just dropped Bielema didn't do the job and he didn't get it done, but they were good for a couple seasons under him. That they just bottomed out that significantly, just astounding to me.
I've been, so now that I've been to practice, and I hate to keep bringing that up, but it is astounding the things that other media people tell me about that era. And one of the things, I won't name him, but someone knows who he is in Arkansas media. Everyone knows who he is if you pay attention to Arkansas football. We were talking about the Chad Morris era and why we weren't allowed. The media is not allowed. I don't consider myself media, by the way, but I'm just a commentator. These guys are media. The guys that write this stuff down. They've got their notepads, right? And it's crazy to watch them work. They're writing and they're looking, they're writing, they're looking.
We are new media, Ty.
I guess so. I don't know. I've been scolded before and told that I'm a pretender, and I'm like, I don't even pretend to be media. I'm just a fat mouth with a camera and a microphone. But we were talking about why the media wasn't allowed to walk in between, because you have the indoor facility, and then adjacent to it you have the outdoor part of the field, and then you have where the special teams field to the left. Media is not allowed to go up the middle anymore, and it had something to do with the Chad Morris something at practice. But they told me that when he first got here, and I think it was in his spring camp, he would walk around and he had a microphone attached to his head, and he was barking out orders over the microphone. Nobody could hear him, and that practice was complete chaos. The assistants didn't know what they were supposed to be doing, apparently, and I've had that confirmed by a couple of people. And the players didn't know what they were supposed to be doing. It makes so much sense, Mark, because I remember watching them and thinking, my God, they just look so disoriented. No one knows what they're supposed to be doing. That's on the field and on the sidelines. And hearing the more of these stories that I've been hearing, it just makes so much sense. And then you hear them talk, some of them that are old enough to remember the Houston Nutt era. I'll ask them, like, was there anything goofy that Houston did? There might have been a couple things. Nothing like what we saw in the Chad Morris era. And apparently, watching Pittman's practices, they're very organized. It's let's go. They've got of course, like I said, you've got a period. And I think they're, I don't even pay attention to how long the periods are. I think they're 10 minutes each. Sometimes I think they change. But it's real quick, and it's like you go through the motions of what you're supposed to be doing, and then they might switch it up on you. But it seems really well organized to me. And again, you see that reflection on the field. So it starts in the off season. All this stuff starts to the very basics of how they run practice, all the way down to the individual's responsibility within their position. So again, I don't know much about the Chad Morris era in terms of what was going on at practice, but knowing what these people are telling me versus what I'm seeing now, Hog fans should be very appreciative of Sam Pittman. I'm not saying you got to settle for 6-6. I'm not saying that at all. Of course you want to do better, but Sam definitely cleaned that up, and it's much more organized in practice.
The last part in that doesn't make any sense to me is it would be understandable if you hired someone, any program in college football, hired straight from the high school ranks, number one, or if they hired a assistant coach or a coordinator from another program in which that coach was not in charge of a program, but he coached at SMU. He was the head coach at SMU, and they were pretty good. So it just didn't make any sense to me. And it was just astounding how that program bottomed out.
And it's not, and I get in trouble with Hog fans from time to time because me, I'm not gonna BS you. I'm gonna tell you what I'm seeing and what I think, and what in a direct, what I observe. I'm just gonna tell you, like, this is what I think's going on. And thankfully, I'm not the only one within Arkansas, quote unquote media or new media. I'm not the only one that does that. But when you think about what they thought they were getting, he had one, I think 7-win season at SMU, and they did look like that was not a bad product. Granted, it was in a group of 5 school, but I think what they thought they were getting when they hired him, I think they thought they were getting, Clemson offensive coordinator. I think that's what they thought they were getting. That offense, that well-oiled machine that Clemson became. I think they thought they were getting that. And he did show signs of it at SMU. He did. I mean, I wasn't one of these people that had a crystal ball that knew it was going to be bad. I was kind of excited for it. And his recruiting, my God, recruiting was fantastic. I mean, pulling in players, like Traylon Burks, who apparently we found out it came down between Arkansas and Clemson, and he chose Arkansas. And guess who was a part of that, right? Jalen Catalon, who could have gone down as one of the greatest defenders to play at Arkansas. Unfortunately, couldn't stay healthy, and now he's transferred back home. But, you look at the pieces that they brought in, it was, oh my gosh, like they're really trying to build something. But where they put all that momentum and concentration in recruiting, they didn't do 1/5 of that to what mattered with as far as putting a good product on the field. I think maybe he might have been preoccupied with the thought that this is going to take some time. I'm just going to do the bare minimum as far as what we're doing in practice. I'm going to put all my concentration in recruiting. Maybe that's what was going on. I don't know. We've heard Sam Pittman kind of talk about, the pressures of balancing that and how difficult that can be. And maybe Chad just put all of his chips into that corner, into recruiting. He did a fantastic job. He recruited at a level where you would expect Arkansas. They should be about a top 20, top 25 year in, year out recruiting program. But Chad and the end of the Brett Bielema era really set them behind. But and it could also just be that he's just a horrible coach. Maybe that's what's going on. That is very likely because he took that negative momentum with him somewhere else as a offensive coordinator, and it didn't work out there either. Crashed and burned there. So yeah, it is hard to believe that they were as bad as they were. It really is.
We've got our buddy Dan Beast Media, who's a YouTube member. So if you would like to join us here at the Voice of College Football as a YouTube member, you can join right on the front page of the channel. But Dan Beast Media is asking, how has Jaheim Singletary looked for the Hogs so far? He was looking for an opportunity, and I wish him well.
He is not on campus yet. At least I haven't seen him. Maybe he's there. I don't know. I haven't seen him. I don't think he's there yet. I think he's supposed to be here in July. I could be wrong about that. If he's there, it must have been the one day that I wasn't there. But I don't think he's on campus yet. But they are excited about him. I think he's supposed to be a redshirt freshman, former 5-star from Georgia. Huge get for Arkansas. Really excited about the possibilities there because we know in the secondary that's one place where they were abysmal. They were so bad. They were one of the worst in the country in total pass defense. And again, they put so much concentration. If you look at the changes on defense, they put so much effort into fixing things on the defense and hiring a guy like Travis Williams and then bringing in Marcus Woodson, who's going to be the co-defense coordinator, who's going to help. Similar what he did at Florida State, where he's going to kind of help adjust the secondary and work on coverage. That's going to be his role, I think, on the defense. They kept Deke Adams on the defensive line. We'll see if that pass rush could keep that momentum. They are going to go to a 4-man front on the defense. They're going to go away from that 3-man front. They're going to go to a 4-man front, 4 legit defensive linemen. But yeah, it's clear that there's an emphasis on the defensive side of the ball. And I think we'll see if Travis Williams was the right hire, but I really like Marcus Woodson, and it's because of Marcus Woodson that they were able to bring in Singletary.
So, Ty, we talked about this the last few weeks when you jumped on in regards to permanent opponents for Arkansas. So, folks, check out the other previous SEC live shows, and I'm sure Ty has talked about that on his channel as well in regards to permanent opponents. There's also a part of this that there's a debate between an 8-game conference schedule, which has been the current format, and going forward with 9, which on one hand makes sense because you've got 16 teams in the league, so you got 15 possible opponents. Just in terms of only playing 8 conference games, there's 7 teams floating out there that you don't play every year, and there's a question in terms of legitimacy of the conference championship when you've got so many teams you don't even play within the conference. But then that has to be weighed against non-conference scheduling. And for those teams like Georgia, Florida, Kentucky, Georgia Tech, they've got an ACC team rivalry that they play each year. And if you size them down to 3 non-conference games, then it's going to be difficult for them to schedule anyone else legit outside the conference. So where do you stand on 8 or 9 conference games for the Hogs?
This is I don't know why so many non-SEC fans are so concerned about how many conference games are the SEC.
They are,
and I don't understand it. I know everyone else does it. I think all the Power Fives do. Here's my question.
Not the ACC.
Oh, they don't. The
They're at
ACC
8.
doesn't.
They're
They're
still
8.
at 8
Why aren't we all over them? I
because
don't
they're not
understand
winning
this.
championships
Why is everyone obsessed with 9 games with the SEC?
because
You
they
could
don't
tell me
send
this.
teams to the playoffs or win championships. So nobody cares.
Yeah. I don't think it makes a difference if Georgia plays. I don't know. If someone like Georgia doesn't make a difference. You look at the best years of Alabama. I don't think it makes a difference if they play another conference game. I don't care. This has been one of those topics. I think they will go to 9. I just think everyone outside the SEC is so I don't get it. They're obsessed with this. And
There you go. Argraw, because it's BS.
okay, tell me why it's BS.
Okay, this is I don't completely agree with this, but I understand some of the points. I think this is the claim by other conference fans.
Sure.
Is, the Big 10, the Pac-12, the Big 12 play 9 conference games. Therefore, if you've got a 12-game season and you're playing at least one non-conference game against a Power 5, maybe you're playing 2, then if you're in the SEC and you're only playing 8 conference games, that's only 8 Power 5 opponents. So typically, if everyone is scheduling similarly outside the conference, you're playing one less Power 5 opponent.
Sure.
Therefore, the argument is that the schedule is easier because it's loaded down with a lot of Tennessee Chattanoogas and Citadels and so forth.
I'm pulling up who did Georgia play this year? Who was their non-conference games?
They played Oregon. That was their big non-conference game.
And so I think when
Georgia Tech, of course, they play every year.
Yeah, I think when they probably scheduled them, I imagine that Oregon was probably pretty good. Yeah, they played Oregon.
Game 1.
Yeah, like you said, they play Georgia Tech every year. That's a rivalry. And then Kent State and Samford.
And so not to cut you off, Ty, before you get to this point, but the initial point that I was making was for Georgia, Florida, Kentucky, and who am I missing? Anyway, 4 teams in the SEC East: Kentucky, Georgia, Florida. Shoot, I'm drawing a blank. Anyway, South Carolina, yes, that they have a rival in the ACC. South Carolina always plays Clemson. We know the other ones. So if you go to 9 conference games, then they are always playing. Let's take South Carolina, for example. They're always playing Clemson. But most fans, and if you look at Georgia's schedule, South Carolina, most years they will go out and they'll play another really good Power 5 team outside the conference.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're putting them in a position where they are playing 11 tough games and they're only getting 1 cream puff.
See, that would be my argument, is that nobody else, maybe the Big 10, nobody else plays the schedule like the SEC. Nobody.
Sure. There's no question about that.
And Bama, you go back to 2021, they went 12-1. They beat Cincinnati in the first round, lost to Georgia 33-18. They beat top 15 ranked Miami 44-13 to start the year off. And at that time, Miami, I don't remember how that year unfolded. Maybe they weren't as good.
Finish. They went 7-5.
They didn't unfold the way they thought, but the point being is they did schedule Miami, who, they still draw 4- and 5-star talent. They had that same year they played an 11th ranked Florida, 12th ranked Ole Miss. They did lose to A&M. They had to play Tennessee, beat the crap out of them. Arkansas was ranked at the time. They beat Arkansas 42-35. And this is 2021.
Mm-hmm.
And then crushed Georgia in the SEC championship. Nobody plays a schedule like the SEC. And I know you know that, but just talking to the people who push against this, I don't know that playing 9 conference games makes as big of a difference as a lot of people think that it will. But at the same time, that's also just going to throw them into the higher, when you talk about like preseason AP top 25, you're going to look back and say, oh, well, they played 9 conference games and, maybe Alabama went 8-1, Georgia went 9-0, maybe South Carolina, who I think is actually on the rise. Congrats to them. Maybe they went 7-2. Well, that's going to give them more opportunities to get a higher rank, and you might end up with more teams out of the SEC in the preseason top 25 based on what they did the year before in the SEC, just in conference play alone. I don't know that it shapes out the way that people thinks that it will. I'm not against it. I'm not saying this to say that I'm fully against it. I'm not. I kind of wish there was I don't know how to feel about the NCAA taking over scheduling for the entire. I think in the next 10 to 15 years, the NCAA may not even exist, but there should be a governing body that determines what that should look like, right? Like
Absolutely.
who you're going to play. And I know it's within the league, but you have all these differences between these other, like you said, ACC and the SEC. They don't play 9 conference games or 9 in-conference games. They just play the 8. Now, I don't know what the Pac does. I think they were playing 9 games maybe. And
They've
then
always played 9. Yeah, they're at 9.
I don't know, like they play 9 and it's not doing them any favors, but maybe that's the point of it. Maybe that's what everyone believes. Well, if we give the SEC 9, they won't be the powerhouse. I severely doubt that. I don't think it does what people thinks that it's going to do. At the same time, I'm not against it. Bring on 9 games. Arkansas' schedule could legitimately be Texas, Oklahoma, LSU. Say what you want about Texas, who I already mentioned. Say what you want about the Mississippi schools, but we know what they're capable of. That's what Arkansas' schedule is going to look like, and you're going to throw a fit because we're not scheduling a 9th SEC team. You're not playing that schedule. Why do you care who we're playing? You're not playing this strength of schedule. Now, I tell you, I think the Big Ten is right on the heels of the SEC. I do respect the Big Ten, but it's still not the SEC. And when you look at first-round talent, when you look at legit NFL talent, what they do in high school recruiting, what they do in the transfer portal, what they do in terms of quality of coaches, there's just no one else but the SEC. That's kind of Nick Saban. That's his line, right? Like, this is the best conference, and we have to play 8 teams that legitimately 5 of them could probably go into the ACC, the PAC out west, the Big 12, and probably be a top 2, top 3 team in those conferences. We got to play 5 of them every year. So I don't know. Again, it's always puzzled me why so many non-SEC fans are obsessed with this topic. Fine, play 9. I just don't think it's going to get you your result that you're looking for.
Well, we're going to hear from them right now because this is getting people stirred up. So here we go. And certainly chime in, Ty, because I'm ready to pounce on some of these these comments because there's validity. There are threads of validity, but there's also very flawed thinking here too. So R. Gross says it keeps an SEC team higher in the rankings by giving them a win when others lose. Okay. So let's do the math here. You got 14 teams in these leagues. Let's not dissect every league. Let's just look at like Big Ten, ACC, SEC of 14 teams. So if you're playing a non-conference opponent, you're playing 14 games against non-conference foes. If you were playing an extra conference game, you're playing each other. So in those 14 non-conference games, what's the SEC going to do? They're probably going to go 12-2, 13-1, depending on what the competition is. Okay. Granted, I understand if they're all playing each other, they're going to go what? 7-7. So there are going to be less wins to the SEC. And to Argraw's point, he thinks that props up and gives an extra win to a number of teams in the SEC who might be 7-5. Suddenly they're 8-4, and maybe they're ranked number 22 in the country. Whatever. Let's also understand that, and this is a bitter pill for everyone to swallow, but they've been swallowing it for at least 15 years now, so you should be used to it. The SEC wins a higher percentage, by far, a higher percentage of non-conference games and quality non-conference games. I'm not just talking about going out and beating UT Chattanooga and Colorado State. I'm talking about ranked opponents. It's not even close. The SEC. So the SEC goes out there and takes care of business. If you looked at the quality wins from the SEC last season, it doesn't even come close to the other conferences. The SEC defeated Ohio State, BYU, Oregon, Utah, Purdue, Miami, Cincinnati, Clemson twice. I could keep going. and you size that up against other conferences, there is, and this is every season that the SEC defeats the teams that are really good out of the other conferences. Not every game, but the majority of the games. So there is some validity. The math does say if you go out and schedule an extra cream puff non-conference, you're going to win almost all those games, versus if you play an extra conference game, somebody's got to lose the games. So half of them are won, half of them are lost because you're playing each other. So yes, maybe the overall record gets slotted up slightly by the SEC.
Yeah, I was going to ask you actually to pull that up because I know you're a numbers guy, you're an analytical guy. Arkansas did beat Cincinnati. Now they did beat BYU as well, but they also lost to Liberty. But Liberty was I would argue, a pretty quality opponent. Not an elite team, not a playoff contender.
I've got them all right here, Ty. I got all the non-conference games right up here.
You're better at that than I am, because I have this
right
thing
there
where I just move ahead and I just put so much behind me. But yeah, they beat the team that just went to the playoffs the year before, Cincinnati. They opened up in Fayetteville against Cincy, took care of business. Cincy was able to kind of make it a game there towards the end. But that doesn't surprise me that the SEC. So I don't know the point for them to go to 9 other than everyone else is doing it. Like, really, I just don't care enough. I am of the mindset of, if you want 9, then play 9. But if that's the case, then everyone across the board should play 9. That includes the ACC and the SEC. And I don't have a problem with that. But and like you just stated, the SEC still does well against whoever you put in front of them. If it's one of the top 4, top 5 teams in the league, they typically could go to your conference and beat your conference. Now, maybe not always. Again, I'm going to yield to the Big Ten. Maybe not always in the Big Ten, but they could certainly do it in the Big 12, the Pac, in the ACC. And maybe there's times where I think the second or third best team in the SEC probably could go into the Big Ten and tear it up and do just fine. But again, these other conferences, including the Big Ten, do not play the schedules that these SEC teams are playing. So that would be my only argument against it. But other than that, I'm okay with the SEC playing 9 games.
Ty, I make the statement at the end of each season, and I say, I wish it would be good for my channel. It would be good for debate. I wish we could have a debate about this. I would love to have a debate and say, you know what? I have no idea which conference is the best. Let's go to the numbers and let's break it down, because I got to do like a 12-part series on this to get to the bottom. No, it's not debatable. It's not debatable. But I still go through the process of breaking down all the non-conference results every season. And I post a video, ACC, what did they do against everyone else? SEC. And the SEC has a clear divide between them and the rest of the college football in regards to defeating quality opponents, and best winning percentage against Power 5 teams, best winning percentage against ranked teams. They just do.
And I'm gonna be real, because you and I are both just college football fans. I would love it if the SEC wasn't so far ahead of everybody. I would love it if them in the Big Ten, if it was a little bit more even across the board. I really would, because I like parity in college football. I sit here and told you on your show, I don't think TCU wins, but I'm going to root for them, just because that would be anarchy if TCU were able to win the national title. It'd be crazy. It would maybe kind of help reset things a little bit, at least in terms of the optics of the playoff. And of course, we know the playoffs are getting an expansion anyways, which I'm all for. But I wish Alabama and Georgia weren't 10 miles ahead of everybody. Now with the transfer portal, it's helping to close the gap in some cases. Not everywhere, but in some cases. I mean, you look at the impact that it's having on baseball and basketball, it's extraordinary. But in football, it's a little less than those two sports. But I'm all for. I want parity in college football. I wouldn't mind at all to see, Michigan win the whole thing, maybe beating, I don't know, Oklahoma State in the national title game. That would be fun for me. That would be entertaining. Like a lot of fans, I'm so tired of knowing that, Clemson, who did eventually kind of die down, but I was getting tired of Clemson. right? But you still had, even though they kind of died down, you still have Alabama in the conversation every year. Georgia's going to be in the conversation every year. Ohio State's going to be in the conversation every year. We got TCU to kind of break through there, and we thought, well, here we go. You had Washington several years ago. I think they actually went to back-to-back, if I remember right. But
no, just one.
Did they not? I thought they had 2.
16.
Okay. All right. For some reason, I thought they got in twice with Peterson at as the Boise State coach.
Peterson.
Yep. Yeah. For some reason, I thought he got them there twice. But I
That's
want
the
more
last
parity.
Pac-12 team to make a playoff.
Oh yeah. And don't get me
7
started
years
on
ago.
them. They're not playing enough games, Mark. That's their problem. They're not playing enough conference games. That's the problem here. Or maybe they need to schedule less in their case. But I like more parity in college football, and I hope that with the expansion, I think we are going to see a little bit more of that. Maybe that'll help to kind of quieten people who are upset about how many games each conference is playing. Maybe not. Maybe it'll put in more teams in the SEC, or it'll have the opposite effect. I don't know, but I do think eventually the SEC is going to go to 9 games, and I'm all for the playoff expansion. I don't know that 12 is enough. That's a conversation that you and I have yet to have, is where you're at on the playoff expansion. If you think 12 is enough, you think that ought to go to 16.
Well, before we get to that, I will say, to close out what we're talking about concerning what happened last season and the SEC's gap over everybody else, that, yeah, we know it's obvious that the Big Ten has the resources. They're the only conference that has the resources, and with bringing in USC in particular, that they can keep within distance of the SEC. Last season, if this would have happened, I still would have thought that the SEC was the best conference, but this would have created a great debate. If Michigan would have beaten TCU, which of course it went down to the wire, it's a great game, but they lost. And if Ohio State would have made that kick against Georgia, which of course they didn't, but they had the ball on the kicker's foot to win the game, Ohio State, they would have beaten TCU to win the national championship.
Oh yeah, I think so.
But if it would have been an all Big Ten national championship, now you're just talking about the very top of the league, but that's what people care about. That would have been, now we would have been in a position all off season to have a great debate, but it didn't quite happen. So here we are. Georgia's the national champion again. And what Art Graw is saying right here, just to address this really quick, this is, again, I appreciate your comment, Art Graw, but it's flawed, because you say Iowa plays Iowa State every year. Keeping a Power 5 team on the schedule is not exclusive to the SEC. I understand that, but you know what? Iowa does not schedule anybody else. South Carolina, Georgia, Kentucky doesn't. Kentucky does what Iowa does. They schedule Louisville. They got the Louisville game. They schedule 3 cream puffs. Other than that, they're playing the MAC and they're playing Western Kentucky. That's what they do. But the other schools, Florida doesn't just say, oh, we've got Florida State every year. No, they schedule Utah. They're going to Utah again this year. Iowa doesn't do that. No, they don't schedule anybody else. So they don't make that comparison.
I think Art Graw is just very, he's got an obsession with the SEC.
And I get it. If you do,
I do too.
Just as we did, you can say that there are artificial wins for the SEC. I get that point. You're right. There are a handful of them. All right. Yes. In terms of the playoff, I'm good with the number 12, because my entire argument against where we've been with the college football playoff, and before that, the BCS, is that I want every conference to be represented. And so we're getting to that place with 12. What I don't like about 12 is I don't want any buys. I don't believe they're fair. I don't believe they're just. I don't believe we have a proper system to determine valid buys. I don't want people selecting buys, but that's what we're going to have. So I don't believe, I don't think you're an NFL guy. There's a difference in the NFL, because they've built a system in which the buy is determining, okay, the Kansas City Chiefs went 14-3 and the Baltimore Ravens went 12-5, and they both won their division, but they both play schedules that are almost identical in terms of the quality of the schedule. So the Chiefs legitimately, based on metrics and based on a objective system, earned that bye. We're going to have people sitting in a room going like, okay, Georgia's 12-1, Ohio State's 12-1, and Clemson's 12. Who do we give a bye to? Oh, okay. They're just deciding.
Yeah.
I don't like that.
I don't like that either. And I don't know if there is a perfect system, because we are talking about college football. I don't know if there is a perfect system, but I'm with you on that. I don't know that. Yeah, I don't want a human determining that. And although it might be true that the SEC and the Big Ten are probably going to be your two best, whoever wins those conferences or whatever, whoever has the best schedule, they're going to earn that first round bye or whatever, however that's going to map out. I don't know that I like someone, because how does that work with the teams also underneath those teams, right? And you say you're good with conference representation. Let me ask you this. Are you good with, and this is going to be controversial. It is. I wish we would do away with the conference championship games. If we're going to go into, and I know I love the SEC championship. It's fun to watch. I'll watch the Big 12 championship because I've got friends that are either OU or Oklahoma State or Texas fans, whatever. I'll kind of watch the Big 12 championship, the Big 10, whatever. A part of me thinks if we're going to go into this playoff expansion, I would really hope that they would do away with the conference championships, because I don't know that I like that. That's what determines, for some of these teams to get in, because then you may pass up other teams that are more deserving, but they don't play in a group of five. And maybe they're going to do this where the group of five schools get in. I mean, clearly that's the goal if you do it that way. I think they should probably do away with the conference championship game. I've loved it in the past. And I stick to saying the BCS era was the funnest era in terms of postseason college football, because it didn't take away, the conference championships were a big deal, and then the BCS games were always fun, and you had a bunch of them. The 14 playoff just killed that. It killed it, and it's made these other bowl games. And I know we've talked about ratings. You told me last time I was on, the ratings were actually, I think you'd said they're still in the green. They were still doing really well. But I think fan participation might be a little bit lower. I don't know. A lot of people maybe it's just maybe it's just people around here. I don't know. But a lot of people just don't seem to be that interested, other than the game that Arkansas's in. And that's not always been the case. So I don't know. I kind of hope we do away with conference championships as we get into the playoff expansion world. I do think they end up, in my lifetime, probably to 16. Because I think more people are going to want more of those games, right? Those, they want to expand the fun, and I think they do end up in my lifetime at 16 games. And if that's the case, then I think they're going to need to do away with conference championships. It's another hurdle for these teams to cross. It's another game you got to play. And on top of that, I just have never liked the idea of, well, this group of five school, let's just say the American, the AAC, they won, so they're in, when they don't deserve to be over some mid-tier Big 12 team. They're going to miss out because this group of five school won its regular season or won its conference game, whatever. I don't know that I like that. I don't know that I like the automatic qualifier argument that's been out there. So I kind of hope they do away with that if we're going to further expand the playoffs. We're headed into uncharted waters for college football. Who knows what it's going to look like 5-10 years from now, but it's already changed so much, Mark. Like, you look back at the last, just even right around COVID. I mean, it's almost like we've gone through the multiverse. It's insane with NIL and the transfer portal. And now we've got playoff expansion, which I think most people wanted. And again, I think it's just going to continue to expand. Who knows? It might be beyond 16. I heard someone on the radio say that they might need to go into the 20s. I don't think that'll happen in my lifetime, but you never know. Who would have thought NIL would be a thing right now? Who would have thought that even just 5 years ago? And here we are. Okay. Oh, you're getting shamed for your Iowa comment, aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah. Got a lot of Iowa fans, which, okay. Tim. All right. Mark, Iowa plays 10 Power 5 teams every year. I get that. They play 9 in conference, then they add Iowa State. The SEC has to schedule 2 non-conference Power 5 games to play 10 Power 5 schools. It is not on Iowa to play 2 non-conference games. It's on the SEC. Okay, let's understand. First of all, not every Power 5 team is created equal, and not every Power 5 team is better than every Group of 5 team.
Very true.
We're talking to the right guy on here right now because Arkansas just played BYU and Cincinnati, both Group of 5 teams technically this past season. How many teams do you think BYU and Cincinnati were better than in the Power 5 last year? About half of them, at least. Cincinnati trucked Indiana by 4 touchdowns last year. Well, that's a Power 5 game that every Big Ten team has to play against Indiana. But Arkansas played Cincinnati. Who was better? And it wasn't even close. Cincinnati. So not every Power 5 game is this brutal, monumental game. Northwestern wasn't even an FCS team last year. They sucked. They were horrible. They went 1-11. They lost to Miami of Ohio. They lost to an FCS team somewhere buried in Illinois somewhere, Southern Illinois, Eastern Illinois, Illinois State, somebody. So to compare every Power 5 against a Power 5 to say that those are all equitable games is a joke. But I do understand that there has to be precedent in terms of Power 5s versus most of the SEC schools we're talking about do go out and schedule 2 non-conference Power 5 teams. Some of them do, some of them don't. But they play in the toughest conference in college football. And again, it's not even debatable.
I agree.
So do you think Maryland, do you think that Minnesota would rather play, Illinois and Northwestern and Purdue and Rutgers and Maryland and Indiana, or that they would want to go play Arkansas, Ole Miss, South Carolina, LSU, and what other comparable SEC schools you want to throw in there? So yes, the SEC only plays 8 conference games. Yes, we have looked at the certain advantage that gives to certain teams who can schedule an extra Group of 5 cupcake game to post another win on their resume to either finish 6-6 instead of 5-7 possibly. But you are assuming that they're going to go play non-conference teams and lose those games when the results show that they're going to schedule those games and they're going to win most of them anyway. They're going to win 75 to 80% of those games anyway.
Yeah. Maybe it's Iowa fans that are obsessed with the SEC. Is that what's going on here?
No, it's all over.
Yeah, it is. You're right.
It is all over.
I've seen some of the stuff that you're talking about, and the SEC, Arkansas scheduled Texas a couple of years ago, and say what you want about Texas, but we know they're probably one of the top 5, some would argue higher, in terms of just talent on the roster. Arkansas knew what they were getting when they scheduled Texas. They knew it would be a good game, and it was a game that fans wanted. It had nothing to do with how good or bad they were. It was a game that Hog fans wanted. And Texas, of course, the next year took a good step in the right direction for their program. That could be a every year thing I think it likely will. They're going to bring back the old Southwest Conference rivalry. But, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Not 2 teams are built alike in the Power 5. And, the SEC's won or lost some games they shouldn't have lost against Group of 5 or non-P5.
Everyone has.
But everyone has, exactly. Arkansas lost to Liberty this year, and I can tell you, as someone who was there, KJ was not 100%. That team was so beyond banged up. They were missing so many pieces. No doubt in my mind, if they were healthy like where they were at the beginning of the year, they would have beaten Liberty. And that was a game for Hugh Freeze that was a showcase for him. It was a big deal. I think Hog fans, I could feel it in the air. Hog fans were just not that ecstatic for the game. You get a sense of these things when you're there and when you cover them a little more hands-on, you get the sense of these things. Liberty did beat Arkansas, but Arkansas did also, like you mentioned, they beat Cincinnati and they beat BYU. And in the same year. And they also, again, they had Liberty on their schedule. No doubt they had no idea Liberty would be as good as they were, but they still played them and they lost. That's, whatever is what it is. But then they also beat two other respectable group of 5 schools in the same year, while also having to deal with the difficulties of the SEC schedules. Someone mentioned it in chat a minute ago. I think it was the Georgia fan. I was trying to scroll up and find it, but he said something about, here it is. Fans of teams not in the SEC cannot relate to what the SEC fans are talking about. Can I get an amen, Ty? They never will. And I think that's actually pretty accurate. Fans who I know plenty of OU and Texas fans just where I live in Northwest Arkansas, so many OU fans, and they'll tell you they're not looking forward to joining this conference. They're excited because of the financial opportunities. They're excited because of the potential of these games. Imagine Oklahoma and Georgia, Oklahoma, Bama, Oklahoma, LSU. For Arkansas fans, it's Texas and Oklahoma and getting the chance to play those teams. I can tell you, though, they're not excited about having to deal with this schedule. It's a buzzsaw. It's ridiculous how difficult this conference can be. And yeah, there are years where they're not as good as maybe, other years, but they're still better than you overall as a conference. So that just is what it is. I wish that they weren't so far ahead of everybody, but they are. And it's not good for Arkansas. Like, the conference expansion is not good for Arkansas. Bringing in Texas and Oklahoma is not good. Now we got to deal with those two, and on top of the teams that are already here. See, Mark, this is what you guys got to remember. Mark's got receipts, man.
Yeah, I don't mess around with this stuff. I break this stuff down every year. And I'm not saying people don't have good points, and I'm acknowledging those good points, but I'm just saying, and we're not going to whittle through all of this, but I break this stuff down every year. And when the ACC goes out and plays 28 games against the Power 5, and they only win 10 out of 28 games, and yes, every conference has embarrassing losses. Every conference goes out and loses some non-conference games, of course, and loses some, as Ty just mentioned, Arkansas losing to Liberty. Well, this is the same Liberty team that has beaten the likes of Virginia Tech and Virginia and won over mid-tier ACC teams the last few years. So they're not anything to just snuff. But every conference has lost embarrassing non-conference games. But the SEC has lost far, far fewer than anyone else. This past season, let's see, the SEC.
ACC fans, look away. And I would love it if the ACC was competitive like it once was. I would love it. I think that's good for college football, Mark. I just think that it is. These teams that stay at the top, I'm not saying that I always want them out. College football is better when Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, Georgia, I would even throw in some other schools, USC. It is better when those teams are competitive and play at a high level. But there's nothing wrong with seeing like a TCU win the Natty last year. I was definitely rooting for TCU. Nothing wrong with Washington. I think that was great when they were in. I was hoping we'd see a lot more of that, but we just haven't. And of course,
this is another thing that tells us something as well, and that's point differential. So if you take a specific game, for example, I'm not a big believer in point differential. I had some moron Notre Dame fans arguing with me the other day. This is unbelievable, Ty. They were arguing with me. There were about 5 of them on Twitter trying to tell me that Notre Dame was a better program than Ohio State because in 2020, Notre Dame only lost to Alabama by 17 points and Ohio State lost to them by 28. So that was their one, even though they just played last year and Ohio State beat them by 2 scores.
Yeah.
and even though Ohio's, and as you can imagine, I just came with them with stat after stat that, NFL draft picks, first round picks, Ohio State's won 56 more games in the last 20 years. They've finished in the top 5 a zillion more times. Top 10, it's not even close. It's not even debatable. So I'm going to liken that to this. So the score of any one particular game, I think, can be manipulated. And the game that Notre Dame fans were pointing to against Alabama, they were down 17-0 before you could blink. And Alabama pretty much just, yawned the rest of the game and beat them 31-14. And Notre Dame scored with like 40 seconds left. It was 31-7 with like 40 seconds left in the game. So don't pretend to argue that that was a close game versus Ohio State. Yes, they eventually lost by 28 points, but it was 14 all.
Yeah.
It was 28-17 at half. It was a competitive game. It was still a 2-score game with 10 minutes left. You don't even compare the two games. So you can do anything with point differentials, but if you're taking like 30 games, the point differential then means something.
Yeah.
And look at this. The SEC outscored its non-conference opponents. I know this is tough to go through, but down here by 198 points last year. Okay. The Pac-12 got outscored by 101 points last year by non-conference opponents. Let's see.
Holy crap.
This is the Big Ten, only outscored its non-conference opponents by 8 points. And here is, that's the Big Ten. Then we get the Big 12. The Big 12 was out. They outscored their opponents by 37 points.
I know this is a dumb question.
And the ACC was outscored by 197 points.
Wow. That honestly is really shocking. That is kind of crazy because Florida State was an uptick. Clemson looked similar to maybe what they looked like in the past. That's actually pretty interesting. But do you do all this yourself?
Absolutely.
Holy crap. You guys, this is why Mark's the best in the business. I mean, this is why I try to talk to him off air. Like he and I think we have a friendship, Mark.
Absolutely.
And that right there, I mean, it really doesn't shock me because just knowing you, that's pretty incredible. You guys should appreciate that. That's actually remarkable.
We all have bias. We all have rooting interests. If we weren't college football fans, we wouldn't be doing this. But I try to present it as unbiasedly and as neutrally as possible and put that aside.
Yeah.
It's
going to be fascinating with, and I know you'll be on top of it, what the scoring differential, what that'll look like, with the expansion of the SEC and how that might affect things. And with the playoff expansion is postseason conversation, but some of that was pretty surprising. I wouldn't have guessed the ACC to be outscored like that. That's nuts.
The ACC had a really good season in 2016, and I still believed that the SEC was the better conference. But again, I do this every year, but the ACC actually, based on the statistics, played better in 2016. But since then, it has been the ACC is just, they're posting a horrible record every year against the other conferences.
And I think what you said too, I don't know why more people, they either debate this, don't agree with it, think that it's just a who cares kind of stat or thing to look at. The number of draft picks, I think, absolutely matters. I mean, and most of your audience will probably agree because they listen to you. They're smart people. But I'm telling you, I've had people come through my live chats and they're like, well, that doesn't matter. And I'm like, really? Really? The amount of draft picks that come out of a conference doesn't at least give you some kind of signal or a sign of the quality of talent that conference has? Because it should. Now, I get it. Some years it's like Alabama and Georgia in the first round. I get that. But you've also had years where you've had a pretty good mix of Ole Miss. Ole Miss has been spitting out first-round talent like crazy. You look at the Big Ten, you've got several teams that produce on a regular basis a fair amount of first-round and total draft picks, not even just first-round draft picks. I think those things matter. High school recruiting. Who's grabbing up all the 4 and 5 stars? A lot of them are going to the SEC. In fact, the majority of them are going to the SEC. Now, the transfer portal, those are numbers I don't know. But I feel like the SEC's done a pretty good job there as well. I mean, Drew Sanders comes to Arkansas from Alabama. He's a potential first-round draft pick, and he had a massive impact on that defense. One player that chose to stay within the conference had a huge impact on the defense. So These things matter. Draft picks matter. High school recruiting matters. The transfer portal, who you're bringing in out of the portal, matters. Coaching quality. You look at SEC basketball. Now, didn't do what we thought it would do in the postseason according to net rankings, but the quality of coaches in this conference, they're just getting better and better and better. And the SEC is slowly climbing up that ladder. The talent's coming in. So it's crazy to think, but these things do matter. Some people, and again, I know your audience, they understand that, but there's so many people that I've seen either in my live chat or on social media that just don't buy into that argument, and I don't understand why not. Because I think it's a telltale sign of just what's going on.
Well, Ty, I definitely want to respect your time, but I'll respond to that this way. I think it's important to define the debate, because I hate when people start debating with me and then, they want to, they start in one path and then they start bringing up other stuff that's not related to their original point. So when it comes to conference supremacy and conference rankings and evaluating these conferences, I just let people know, what do you want to argue? Are we arguing just results on the field? And if we are just arguing results on the field, and then everything you just brought up about NFL draft selections and recruiting and all that, we'll put that aside. Doesn't matter. Does not matter at all. We'll just talk about the results on the field.
Yeah.
And the SEC is still going to have the best results on the field. But if you want to bring a complete picture of everything into it, recruiting, NFL draft selections, all of that, then the SEC is still going to win the argument.
Right.
And to your point, it only makes sense that the recruiting rankings are heavily in the SEC's favor. Heavily in the SEC's favor.
Yeah.
The NFL draft selections, substantially in the SEC's favor. So it substantiates the two processes, because basically you're recruiting the best players, and 3 to 4 years later, you are churning out the best players to the NFL draft.
Right.
It makes sense.
Well, and see, you've got someone in chat already. So why are there twice as many NFL from Michigan, and some other comments about
what?
Yeah. Dave Snow there.
Okay.
So why are there twice as many NFL from
Michigan than
NFL from Michigan?
Vanderbilt? What's he talking about?
I don't know.
Dave, come on here.
So,
okay.
Let me
say this real quick.
Sure.
Right now, Dave, I am off by probably like 5 players. On NFL rosters right now, there are about 340 SEC players and about 240 to 250 from the Big Ten. And the Big Ten's number 2. And then there's another gap below the Big Ten. But that's usually about where that range is. So I don't know what you're talking about. More players, twice as many from Michigan.
And it's not the end all be all. It doesn't mean because you have 3 first-round prospects on your roster that you're going to go 12-0. You still have to have quality coaching. You still have to have a good product. You still have to have a good game plan. I'm saying that they're pretty big factors. And like Mark just pointed out, high school recruiting and total draft, first-round draft, doesn't matter. SEC is dominating. And what do you know? The SEC is regarded year in and year out as the best conference for the last 12 to 15 years. I just don't think there's any debate. And I give a lot of – I'll say it again. I think the Big Ten is legitimately the second best. I don't think it's a huge gap. I might be wrong. I don't think it's a huge gap, but there's definitely some correlation there when you've got those two things and you have this dominance on the field by the SEC. And then you looked at those numbers that you pointed out earlier about the SEC outscoring their opponents. My gosh. I mean, it's almost like this all matters. Not one thing matters more than the other.
Yeah.
The other, but it's like it all combined and compounded, it matters.
You can imagine, Ty, when Missouri or South Carolina loses a bowl game, I get flooded with, if I come on live after the bowl, and people are, and I'm like, hang on, does that count? Absolutely, it counts. We're going to use it as one little slice of information. And yes, Missouri just lost to Army in a bowl game 2 years ago, or Wake Forest this past. Does that count? Yes, I'm going to count it. I'm not going to, but we're not going to go crazy that the SEC has suddenly fallen to be the worst conference in college football because Missouri lost a bowl game.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I don't know where Michigan's showing up here, Ty.
That's the deciding factor.
These are 2022 NFL rosters right here. Bama's number 1, Ohio State's 2, Florida, Miami, LSU, Florida State, Oklahoma, Georgia, Penn State, Texas A&M.
Wow. I hadn't realized Florida State. I mean, I know they recruit well, and I didn't realize they were that high. I mean, they're ahead of Georgia. What's going on, Florida State? Although Norvell's doing a pretty good job down there, I will say.
Look at
college football is better when Florida State's good. I mean, I do cover the Razorbacks, but I do like it when other conferences and other teams that I remember watching growing up that were great. I love seeing them being competitive again, along with maybe some group of 5 schools. Wow. So that's what is this? 505.
So this is total NFL players. I was going by the draft itself. So
Wow.
if we want to
505.
believe, I'm sorry, I just want to cite the source. I don't know who this is. Brady Balhorn draft trends.
Someone Google him real quick.
So anyway, he's done his homework apparently here. So we've got the SEC ahead of the Big Ten, ACC, Pac-12, Big 12. Now, let's be fair. The Big 12 only has 10 teams. So,
yeah,
you got to do the math on and the Pac-12 has 12. So,
wow, 505.
The Big 12 did not have a player drafted in the first round the last 2 years. Not one.
Which is nuts. I mean, say what you want about the conference. I'll probably agree with you, but I mean, Oklahoma, not a single one. Texas, who's kind of maybe, I think, taking a good step. You look at Baylor, TCU. That's kind of crazy to think. 2 years. Did you say 2 years without a first round?
Yes.
Wow.
And haven't had a defensive player for like 3 or 4 years past that.
That's not shocking at all, because that conference, I'm sorry, Big 12 fans, all right? We're excited about you coming over, Oklahoma and Texas, but your conference doesn't know how to spell defense. It's kind of crazy. Great offenses, fantastic offenses in that conference, but defense is just such a challenge for them.
And folks, you guys should know, if you watch me on a regular basis, that I vet out this information, and when I produce a video, it's got the real information. I'm just spitballing, grabbing sites, so I cannot verify their numbers.
I think you have people that are wanting to call in. Oh.
So here we have most NFL players, 22 last NFL season. So we got Bama at 1.
UCLA with 26.
So the other one had Ohio State number 2. This one has Ohio State at 3, LSU at 2. There's Michigan at 6.
I wouldn't have guessed UCLA to be in the top 20, or South Carolina to be in the top 25. Ole Miss has done a really good job. Now, how they got some of those players, sure, okay, there's some questions there.
Yeah. Well, UCLA has been astoundingly an underachieving program. Like, they have really good NFL draft selections and players in the NFL, UCLA. You know who surprisingly has a really good, strong NFL showing that is a bad football program is Cal.
Oh, really?
Yes. If you look at the amount of players, and more specifically the quality of players that Cal's produced, and they're awful in football.
Also kind of crazy to think that, I mean, UCLA is ahead of USC on this list. Who would have thought that?
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's been a while since USC's been really relevant, but I mean, they've had some good years in between there since the Leinart and Reggie Bush era.
And much like recruiting, it's not just the list, but it's how quickly that list drops. And this is what people don't understand in recruiting, is if you look at the ratings points on the recruiting and you say, for example, I'll take this for an example. 2 years ago, I got a lot of argument because Ohio State was number 4 and Michigan was 8, and people were thinking, big deal, 4 and 8. Well, if you look at the ratings points, the difference between 4 and 8 was the same as between 8 and 27. So it drops just like here. Bama's 1, Clemson's 11. You think, okay, well, there is a difference there. But no, it's twice as many players. So it drops quickly.
Wow. Well, and yeah, I'm surprised A&M's not actually higher. I mean, they've of course.
Sure, they've recruited great.
But a lot of players have left that program.
Our buddy at Dan Beast Media wants to jump in here quickly.
Good afternoon,
Hey,
fellas.
how's it going, man? How are you?
Well, it's been an entertaining show, that's for sure.
How you doing?
I'm doing
What's
well.
up?
I'm doing well. Can you hear me?
Yeah, gotcha.
Okay, good.
What's up?
Good. Just making sure. Yeah, I mean, it's been an entertaining show. I'm doing well, thank you. Actually, it looks like you guys are having fun. They're
stirring the pot. That's all we're doing.
Oh, I know. There's originally I was going to call in and talk about Georgia had their first scrimmage, so I had some notes on that, but then this conversation went a completely different way. So it's been entertaining, that's for certain. And I'm with you, Ty, and you mentioned the comment earlier. It's one of those deals where and Mark, this will not be new to you. It's the thing about the league. If you don't watch the SEC closely, you're not going to understand what makes it so difficult for the most part, because it comes back to not only every team, every conference has road games and home field advantages and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. But the difference is it's just the quality of player that you're up against every week in the league. And it's not just, we're not talking about the top tier players. We're talking about the second wave and the third wave of players. So that's the factor that differentiates between the top teams in our conference and the teams that are mid teams, is that quality depth, right? So like, for example, Kentucky, not exactly considered a top tier team in the conference. However, at the like end of season interviews for the University of Georgia, every year Kentucky is listed as one of the most physical and toughest games that the Dogs play, especially since Stoops has been there. And that's because he recruits the type of athletes that bring that kind of game. And when you do that week after week throughout the conference, and again, all the teams in the league have these players. It's just some teams don't have as many, but you're still talking about top flight talented players, even if it's just one or two. And when you grind your way through that season, it matters. And so anyone who's not watching their team as intently as we watch ours week after week go through those teams, you're just not going to have an appreciation for the toll that takes on your team as a whole. So I think that's one of the biggest pieces. And I'm not faulting fans of other conferences. Why would you know that? But if you're inside the league and you watch your team, you know that.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't, being down here, this is mostly SEC country, other than Oklahoma fans and Oklahoma State fans. But I agree. I unless you're really just a fan of college football, and we're going to be called biased because we cover SEC teams, we talk about SEC teams. But if you're just a fan of college football and watch enough of it, and I'll be honest, I don't sit around and watch Big Ten football all day. I'll catch a game. I'll watch them when I can. I'll watch highlights. I'll catch what I can online when there's not a good SEC game going on. You could see the difference. You could see the difference on the field. You can see the product on the field is better. And going back to what I said about draft picks and how well they recruit, it's the SEC and then a pretty good distant, Big Ten behind them in terms of just recruiting. Maybe apparently there's quite the gap in the what was that, the total NFL roster. I didn't realize it was that big of a gap until Mark brought it up between the SEC and the Big Ten, but it's different. And you only understand it if you're here and if you're playing it week in and week out.
Right. You and I don't need someone to tell us what this league is. We see it. But then when Mark comes in and he brings numbers and shows you, then it completely solidifies our point, right? Like I'm not trying to bang on anybody else. I'm just saying, why is it so hard to give the league the credit it deserves for running that gauntlet? It's just not the same. It's simply not the same. Someone in, the chat, you always see stuff like, well, if this team had 4 and 5 star talent, I wonder what they would look like. My response is, well, go get them then. Go recruit them. Make the investment necessary to go get those players. If you don't want to do that, then I don't want to hear from you.
The portal exists. I mean,
isn't that kind of the point?
That's it. And don't get me started on the portal. That's how. Oh, the two things. And Tom mentioned this earlier. Basketball, baseball, yes. The portal, absolutely impactful because you have a smaller number of players, right? The dynamic is smaller. In a game like football, if you go get one defensive tackle or you go get one running back, yeah, you're going to have a good player. That's fantastic. Good for you. Is that going to make you a champion? No. So don't come at me with transfer portal is going to change our team. Good luck with that. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. It takes a lot more than, like I said, Arkansas picks up Drew Sanders, and they were still one of the worst defenses in the SEC.
Right.
You know?
I mean, I mentioned Jaheim Singletary earlier.
Yeah.
That kid is prototypical. Okay.
Yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait to watch him. I really can't. I'm excited about that.
I think he's going to be a really good player. Yeah. But the bottom line was, he took a red shirt last year. Why? Because he couldn't get on the field. That's why.
Yep.
And, guys like MJ Sherman transferred out of Georgia, went to Nebraska, probably going to start for them. Could not see the field, had 4 total tackles last year. Okay. He's a fine player. I love the kid. I hope he does great. I'm just saying that, just don't come at me with the portal's going to turn the league, college football over. It's just not. And I don't, again, I don't want to hear about, well, they've got these advantages. Not my fault. Sorry, not sorry. You want to be better? Invest. Compete. Right? I mean, I don't know what to tell you.
Kids,
I'm a little fired up. I hadn't even talk about any of this stuff. I was going to talk about Georgia spring football. I was going to bring some points about Georgia's non-conference scheduling, which I posted in the chat. You can find it. I don't want to hear anybody talk to me about Georgia's non-con either. Not a word. I mean, it's just not. I laid out for you what we have over the next 11 years. I laid out for you what we've played over the last 15 years.
Yeah.
Don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
Not a word.
But this year's schedule is bad.
Oh, I'm not saying it isn't. It's softer than Sharman this year. Yeah. But Oklahoma was on that schedule. So.
Were they?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Week 2, Oklahoma in Norman. And the SEC said, you can't play that game because they're coming into the league. And then at the last minute, they went and got whoever was available to fill the slot.
Oh.
So, again, they make every effort to schedule those games. Much like Alabama has done over the last 10 years, Kirby wants those high-profile games. It is 4 hours of prime-time advertising for him and his program.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go out and you show up the way they did against schools like Oregon, who wound up being a top 15 team, I think, and schools like that, there's no better advertising than that.
Yeah.
So you want to get the recruits, make the investment. You want to be in those, slots, go play well in those games. I don't know. It's kind of a zero-sum thing. It's just one of those things where you get tired of hearing the same old stuff. And they're like, well, you're a Georgia fan. You can say whatever you want right now. That's fine. I can. I'm glad Georgia's doing well. That's fantastic. But I've also lived through Jim Donnan in 8-4, right? I lived through Mark Richt underachieving. I've done that. Now, even with all that said, over the last 20 years, the Dogs have averaged 10 wins a season.
Yeah.
So
even Mark Richt, I always like Mark Richt, and he
I love
killed
Mark.
it in recruiting. Just 10 wins just wasn't enough for people, and Georgia should aim higher. They did, and they knocked it out of the park.
Right. That's the thing. Kirby, when he came to Athens, said, listen, I know how to build it. I need a confirmation of yes. And they gave him what he wanted, and you see the results. I just posted on my YouTube community page last night. If Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, and USC, all 4 jobs came open tomorrow, regardless of the reason, what is the most appealing job in the nation today? I mean, vote for whoever you like, make your argument. I looked at my poll before I jumped on here. I think currently Georgia's running away with it, which isn't much of a surprise because it's a Georgia page. But I'm just saying what they've built, what they've put together over there, they've earned it and they're doing well.
Yeah.
And after many, many, many years of being close but not getting there, it's finally nice to get there.
Well,
right, folks, we are
Yeah.
well past time. And Ty, thank you so much for being here. And I know I kept you way, way too long, but not too
Good to
long for
finally see
us.
you, Ty.
It was great to have you.
Yeah, you too. It's nice to
Dan
meet
Beast
you.
Media, thanks for jumping on here. I appreciate you.
Thanks for having me on, Mark. Appreciate it as always, my man.
Again, Tusk Talk with Ty right here on YouTube, and also your favorite audio platform, correct?
I'm not on any. I'm only on YouTube right now.
Okay, just on YouTube. Tusk Talk with Ty.
Hey, I just passed
Absolutely.
1 million total views. I just passed that.
There it
So
is.
I did it. I did it.
That's phenomenal. That is phenomenal.
Congratulations.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, next show here at the Voice of College Football is our Iowa Live show at 5:30 Eastern. So we'll see you over on the Iowa channel. We've got Nebraska at 7, then we've got USC at 8 tonight. All right, so we'll see y'all back then. Ty, thanks for jumping on. Dan Beast Media, thanks for being here, and we will catch everybody soon.